The male protagonists and secondary characters in TV shows have seen a dramatic remoulding in the last few decades. From formative shows like Happy Days to The Sopranos to more contemporary and recent outings like Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad, and even animation. My aim in this video essay is to analyse and attribute possible cause to the trajectory of modern TV's journey from archetypical masculine heroes to giving audiences a flawed, emotionally adept and realistic protagonist on our screens. In this video essay, I'll be taking a look at the police-centred sitcom Brooklyn Nine-Nine and the stylish psychological thriller adaptation Hannibal. To be clear, I'll be analysing the shows rather than the source material they're adapted from, other than occasionally touching upon changes made by the showrunners and why. From Cops to Cannibals, a contextual study of TV's journey to positive male representation. In the golden age of television, a time where streaming services and highbrow meta miniseries rule supreme, and TV has become as expensive and expansive as Hollywood films, we must ask, who's responsible for these changes? We're experiencing a clash as TV begins to deviate from tradition. Although representation has been changing in the silver screen, a different picture is painted behind it, as explained by analysts, quote, HBO has only aired one original drama series created by a woman in 40 years. It's clear that male showrunners, writers and directors continue to dominate the industry, even today, despite protests to issues such as poor representation of characters, female, LGBTQ+, and male alike in both its inaccuracies and its deceit. To paraphrase Dora and James, hegemonic forces still largely determine who gets to tell their story, what kind of stories can be told, and the size of the platform, influencing our cultural ideas about sex and gender as a result. Coupled with movements such as Me Too, the gender pay gap protests, and even Black Lives Matter, it's clear to see that things in our world are shifting for the better. Before we get into our case studies, let's first look at the reverse. TV today is, quote, a cultural forum and reacts to the world around us. Despite men still populating a vast portion of the industry, we have seen considerable change made to the way in which female characters are presented to us early on, with many shows such as Fleabag, I May Destroy You and I Am Not Okay With This, which give us strongly written, well-rounded female leads. Miller continues, as feminist critiques have emerged, so TV itself has represented feminism and changed in response to it. So, an improvement has been made regarding female representation and continues that pattern in the present with a gradual increase in female showrunners, writers, and directors being integrated into the television industry. So, what about male characters? Just because men are a large part in controlling how these shows are produced does not mean these characters have been done justice. In fact, it's quite the opposite, and the situation's been allowed to continue within these borders. No activist movement has pushed a societal re-examination of men's gender identity in the manner that occurred for women. Male characters have been presented as stoic and strong and even aggressive over the past 50 years or so, and things have finally begun to change recently, in part due to widespread societal re-examination of what it means to be masculine in the 21st century. In regard to past depictions, Amanda Delott states, characteristics consistent with a preferred masculinity have pervaded, always specific to the era of production, that might generally be described as the attributes consistent with what it is meant to be a male. Think Bonanza, All in the Family and The Honeymooners, for example. Men were heads of families, strong, dominant, and able to protect and fix everything. On the other hand, one of the most prevalent contemporary shows that does an amazing job of fair representation of male characters across a broad spectrum is NBC's police procedural sitcom hit, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. In Brooklyn Nine-Nine, which I'll refer to from now on as B99 to save time, we're presented with an eclectic ensemble of both male and female characters, none of which conform to tokenism or any stereotypical views of what they should be based on their gender, race, profession, or sexuality. According to Andy Crump, we find the guys of Brooklyn Nine-Nine struggling to keep their grip on their manhood. B99 stars Jake, a young white NYPD detective who loves his job but's also immature with abandonment issues, along with Captain Hull, a middle-aged, gay African-American man in a position of authority, Terry, the department sergeant who also happens to be black, muscular and, quote, the most openly emotional character in the show, and Charles, an effeminate, oversharing, clingy colleague and BFF to Jake. However, these attributes are not what make the characters who they are, these are simply features of their personalities. Unlike the TV of the past, there's no big episode or storyline centred around Hulk coming out, or Terry coming to grips with his emotional side. That's who they are, unapologetically, with no need to establish this to the audience. Hulk's role in the show isn't pegged on his identity, his casting isn't to check some diversity boxes. In fact, not one member of the main ensemble cast is a perfect, unflawed, strong white man, which is truly a great feat, especially in a police precinct setting, which can often be viewed as misogynistic or a xenophobic environment. Sergeant Terry Jeffords is a great example of how to break from the mould when it comes to representation. Men like him are often portrayed as the poster child for toxic masculinity. He's black and he's the sergeant of a precinct. Simultaneously, he's a doting father, gets anxious and breaks down a lot, and obsessively loves yoga, along with often referencing his vulnerabilities, such as his past junk food addiction and trying to be a supportive and loving husband. The most important component of Cruz's persona is his vulnerability, that delicate quality that so many guys blanch at expressing in public, Crump argues. A key theme in B99 is fatherhood, one of the societal constructs rooted in the idea of manhood. We're shown a broader, realistic spectrum of fatherhood and different approaches to it in the show, with Jake's father being introduced as having cheated on and run out on him and his mom, and Terry on the opposite end, caring for his young girls to a T. He's not only a provider, he's also a caregiver and very much emotionally involved. The progressive approach to representation within B99 is positive, portraying several emotionally intelligent, well-rounded characters supporting each other through their vulnerabilities, while also knowing they're not needed to be fixed. On the other hand, we have Hannibal, a stylised TV adaptation of the infamous franchise of the same name. However, NBC did not follow examples set by previous source materials. Instead, creator Brian Fuller strived to present a gender-neutral, non-exploitative approach to the crime procedural genre. In a landscape littered with crime procedurals that exploit women, Hannibal stands out. Hannibal took the characters from the law and improved upon them in many ways, making them more fleshed out and interesting. Thomas Harris wrote roles for a whole bunch of white men, and then Clarice Starling. In Brian Fuller's version, half of those white men are women, and many of them aren't white, claims Sadie Doyle, author of Hannibal's feminist take on horror. Hannibal stands out in three main ways: its depiction of key characters, its depiction of sexuality, and its depiction of violence. Hannibal is seen as one of the most gruesome shows on TV. However, it stands out because it's horror with a profound respect for human life, according to Doyle. For example, when there's a dead body totem pole or a blood angel victim, there's no slow pan over a naked woman's torso or any other gender-specific body parts. Hannibal shows the dead in a respectful manner. Violence is always aestheticised on Hannibal, but it's never sexualised, Doyle continues. A similar approach was taken when approaching representation of the living too. Of course, none of these characters were ever going to be exactly stable in Hannibal, but they're not hyper-masculine or conformative of gender roles either. Dr. Lecter is shown to be patient and methodical, having a friendly and calm demeanour to the other characters. Even when committing straight-up evil deeds, this Hannibal Lecter has a grace and elegance to him that transcends his role of gender. Mads Mikkelsen, known for his iconic depiction, even went as far as to say he portrayed what he believed to be the physical embodiment of Satan rather than just a man. Another not traditionally masculine quality of the character is his love of cooking. Yes, this is of course important to the character, but we're shown many scenes of Hannibal in his beloved immaculate kitchen, cooking indulgent dishes with the flair and grace of a world-renowned chef. Then we come to our second main character, Will Graham. Will is an awkward, fragile empath who's on the autism spectrum and rescues stray dogs. Immediately we are presented with a plethora of non-traditional masculine features, despite him also being an FBI investigator and the show's anti-hero protagonist, described as a disregard for conventional characterisation that allows the show to also transcend some of the usual trappings of masculinity. Alongside this, he grows to love Hannibal while the facade remains that he is not the big bad Will is hunting, to the extent of implied homoerotic tendencies and subtext. Will is at war with himself over his doubts and eventually his requirement to bring Hannibal to justice. As briefly mentioned, the way Hannibal depicts sexuality and sex scenes is also highly relevant within these frameworks of masculinity. Sexuality is also more fluid in Hannibal than its counterparts. The show is rife with intentionally written homoerotic subtext between the two leading characters. While Hannibal still has never had a gay man as one of the central characters, it acknowledges both male and female bisexuality, which is unfortunately a rarity. It's rare that two lead male characters in a show will also have this tension between them. In addition to this, male characters are sexualised far more than female characters. For example, there's a sex scene between a male and female character that almost entirely emphasises the male experience, something rarely done in TV, often due to the male gaze. Whether or not this is problematic is a whole other conversation in itself, but it's significant that the female and queer gaze is being acknowledged. To summarise, Hannibal deconstructs masculine stereotypes by showing male characters actively defying masculine tropes, being very fluid sexually, and by featuring violence that is never once driven by gender roles. It explores many of the misogynist tropes of the TV crime procedural, and even the texts where it finds its roots, according to Doyle. These case studies serve as prime examples of TV across genres depicting well-developed, emotionally adept protagonists and secondary characters through deconstructing masculine stereotypes such as fatherhood, gender, sexual fluidity, disability and emotional sensitivity. The Western world is changing to be more educated concerning gender roles and fair representation of a broad spectrum of realistic personalities. Gender, racial and LGBTQ+ rights movements of recent years have led a once narrow-minded industry to reconsider how they're hiring writers, showrunners and crew, along with writing and creating characters, leading to an accurate, fair representation of masculinity in the landscape of modern TV. From shows about case-cracking cops to calculating cannibals.